And here
Shoestring.
we have an EcoBuilding. Here we have an EcoBuilding on a shoestring. Whoops. It sort of got stuck. Now that didn't happen in rehearsals. Whoops. Oh, there we go. So there we have it. An EcoBuilding on a shoestring. You were expecting this to go on much longer, weren't you? So what is eco-building? And why would you have to eco-build on a shoestring? Well, they're interesting questions, so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. Well, the eco-building, in my understanding of it, is sort of like the living architecture. It's making buildings that really nurture life. And that would be the life that would be lived inside the building, and the life that would exist outside the building. So the building then sort of harmonizes really with life. And of course this is the big unseen element of architecture, that we can't actually see life. We can only feel it and experience it in ourselves, and yet buildings are, made of physical things. So the emphasis generally when architecture is being created is on these physical aspects of the architecture. But in fact the most important part really of the architecture is this part really inside, is the invisible part of the architecture. And that's pretty much impossible to see that aspect of the architecture when it's being created, because generally the architecture is created on paper or on a computer screen, but basically it's two-dimensional. So it has, if you're designing a wall or what's called an elevation, it's got a length and it's got a height, and then another wall has a length and a height. So it's a congregation of two-dimensional images, really, is what it is. They're just sort of symbols of what the thing will finally be. But because the drawings are restricted to two dimensions, and as you'll probably notice, restricted to what it'll look like on the outside. So basically, architecture is designed by looking at what the walls of the building will look like outside. Now that is a severe limitation, because where people actually spend their time is inside. So this is the reason so many buildings seem so strange to us, both in terms of what they look like on the outside, but particularly in respect to how they feel to us on the inside. And this is how we experience architecture really, is as a feeling, as a sensation. And the reason we create architecture is straight out of our desire to survive. It's keyed right into our survival instincts. And our survival instincts, keep us breathing and keep us seeking food, and keep pushing us to spread our genes and to reproduce. So this really is the function of the shelter making, as I call it. It's we can see this in nature, the whole nest building process that the animal kingdom goes through, that it's not that different for humans. We're finding a place where we can rest and reproduce, and of course it's in latter times it's been tied in with the whole food production. As soon as people settled and produce food surpluses, you need buildings to keep those food surpluses in, and you need some form of enclosure to demarc your territory. So it's like we take the boundaries that we have in our own selves, like our personalities, our aura and so on, which are invisible, and we represent those in a larger, more material form when we make our homes, so that it encloses really our world. So So we extend our own territorial boundaries out to a larger, really, extent, and it has this psychological function then, in that it allows us to basically be ourselves, that we can let down the defenses that we normally have, just to be able to deal with the fact that we're in this world and there's lots of people in it, and you know, you can't be entirely vulnerable to all of that, but you have to have the layers of protection. That what the shelter does is allows us to transfer our personal boundaries into the boundaries that are more, you know, robust, so that, you know, we can relax. This is a very important part of the shelter making, that we have places we can relax. Even the people who are homeless will have their doorway, or they'll have their place where they can, you know, rest and psychologically let their defenses down. And of course, in law, these boundaries are recognized as being sacrosanct. You know, the threshold, even a policeman can't proceed beyond the threshold without due warrant, or if someone intrudes past that boundary, you know, either through the window or through the door, you'd be ringing the police or whatever. In some places, you're entitled to kill someone who goes through there without. So these are part of what I call the invisible architecture, these aspects of architecture that have a very strong impact on us as human beings. But if that's not recognized when we make the design for the building will be lacking in those aspects. So, like, what would be a parallel? If you think of buildings as boxes, that if everybody is shoved into the same box, there's bound to be a lot of unhappy people. So what would be another parallel? Let's say there was only one size of shoe made in the world, and that we all had to get into those shoes. Yes, some people would be lucky and they'd fit those shoes, but most people just wouldn't. So people sort of walking funny. So like, if you look at people living funny, it's in part because they're shoehorning themselves into buildings that don't really suit the shape of their lives. So the challenge of the design then is to get hold of these invisible aspects of ourselves and get some clarity on what they are, so that we can then shape the architecture around that basic abstraction. So we can begin to see then that architecture is made of these two distinct parts. And I'm talking really the eco-architecture, the eco-building, that it has this living quality, that the building has these living qualities, and it's all respectful of life, and the life is represented by this invisible realm, because it's a representation of the life that's inside us. So we're like the building. So the building helps us to see ourselves and to see our lives. So we can use the design of the architecture, and it can just happen with the, you know, a few pounds worth of euros worth of cardboard, or, you know, an empty box from the grocery store or something, that we can act this out. This facility that the architecture has, but we can see it in the making of the design, that the building is made of two distinct parts. It's made of a physical part, which we can think of as boundaries, like our own boundaries, and then it has this invisible part, that's the space that's being enclosed by those boundaries. And the interesting part of that space is that in comparison to the physical parts of the building that have to be paid for and ordered from the builder's providers, or somehow salvaged or harvested, that the space aspect of it, which is probably the most important, if not the most important part of the building, comes for free. So, like, where does it come from? What is it made of? You know, what effect does it have on us? Well, we can see when we take this two-dimensional sort of representation of the building design, that when we form that into a different shape, in other words, when we turn it into a three-dimensional object, so we've gone from the two-dimensional into the three-dimensional, that it's that, I suppose, activity. And then if we put a lid on that, yes, we've made a box, and when we look in the box, yeah, it doesn't seem that there's anything in there, but in fact there is. What is in there is a portion of space, is what's in there. And that's what we do when then we go out onto a piece of land. We put boundaries on a portion of space, and then we get inside that space. And that space is a piece of, yeah, the universe that we exist in. And the universe is holographic. Each portion of the universal space is present in each portion of it. So what we're doing is we're scaling down that vastness of the universe to a manageable size, so that we're bringing it down to a human scale where we can get in touch with that invisible realm. So if we look then at traditions of architecture, to find, you know, these threads, yeah, we discovered it way back in ancient Indian tradition of Vastu Shastra, the science of dwelling, the oldest treatise on architectural design. And that very much talks about the prana, the life energy, that a building can facilitate the flow of life energy into the people themselves. And then if we look at, say, feng shui, that people would be more familiar with, the feng shui grew out of that Indian tradition in China. And again, we see the same thing. It's the positioning of the building, particularly in the landscape, the natural energies that are available within that landscape, the people themselves who are going to inhabit that building, that the design of the architecture takes all that into account. And the result that is desired is then that the creation of that building will foster the flow of life energy into those lives that are being lived within it. And that is the function of the architecture. So the geomancer would have to go out on the site and douse the energies to see if they were appropriate. There'd be, so if anyone else's phone, maybe we could get them turned off so that we're not being interrupted.